Now, what's grabbing international headlines this hour is the NATO summit in Vilnius. As NATO leaders gathered in Vilnius, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said it was unprecedented and absurd not to have a time frame for Kyiv's entry into NATO. Now, Ukraine's future membership of the bloc has already dominated these headlines. Now, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg earlier said that leaders will send a positive message on the path forward for Kyiv's admission. Right after criticizing the alliance, Zelensky lands in Lithuania to attend this, in Vilnius to attend this summit. Now, NATO leaders have said that Ukraine's future lies within the alliance, but why shy away from announcing a formal invitation or timetable for the accession the country has been seeking? Now, a declaration agreed upon by the leaders stated that Ukraine's future is in NATO. It further stated that Kyiv's Euro-Atlantic integration had moved beyond the need for a membership action plan. Now, the declaration also says, and I quote, "We will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine only to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met." So what are these conditions? Interestingly, the leaders have not specified the conditions that Ukraine needs to meet. We'll delve deeper into that, but for now, here's a quick report.
You know, the main goal is a full-fledged membership.
Yes, but leaders, president, now they are discussing removing.
That's why I will not discuss with you right now, because we will wait tomorrow and we will hear, we will see. But right now I come to sign with my colleagues, ministers of defense of the French countries, a memorandum regarding the F-16 training courses coalition.
It's well known that Sweden, after 200 years of non-alignment, we seek common protection, but I also want all NATO allies to know that we also provide security, provide common security, and we are here for the long term. We are decisive in fighting terrorism, we're decisive in fighting organized crime, so I think Sweden has a lot to bring to the table as well. So I'm very happy with this result from yesterday, and now we look forward to the final two ratifications. Well, it's a well-known position from Sweden to have close ties between Europe and Turkey, so that's well known. And now we are promoting closer economic bonds, modernizing the customs union, providing better visa regulations and so forth. And I think there is a fertile ground for a closer cooperation.
Edward Joseph, who is a foreign policy expert, joins me live right now. Many thanks to you, Edward, for joining in. Now, we're certain that there are going to be a host of issues up for discussion at the NATO summit, but the epicenter of the conversations is bound to be Ukraine and the defense of NATO and the collective West. It's important to highlight that Ukraine's President Zelensky has sharply criticized the expected language around the potential accession or joining of Ukraine and its membership. Give us a bit of a background in terms of what has deterred Ukraine's membership so far.
Thank you, Akasha. Great to be with you. And you describe it exactly right, that the alliance, the NATO alliance, has been reluctant to go further than it did back in 2008 when it said that Ukraine and Georgia would become members of NATO. And that was controversial at the time, and it still remains controversial. And now we have the opposite. We have here where Ukraine, it's quite ironic, is under invasion, unprovoked invasion from Russia, and it is now that alliance is less confident. So back in 2008, it was saying Ukraine, yes, will become, when it wasn't attacked by Russia. Now that it needs the alliance's defense, the alliance is saying, hang on, wait a minute. Now, what this is about, it's very clear. There's differences within the alliance, including the NATO alliance's most powerful and significant member, that's the United States, over granting and advancing Ukraine's NATO membership. Why? Because the United States and some of its allies are concerned about signaling to Russia that it is in a war, that NATO is in a war with Russia. They are supporting Ukraine, providing weapons, providing lethal assistance, providing intelligence, all sorts of support, political and humanitarian support. But President Biden and some other allies draw the line at active, direct engagement on the part of NATO in the fight.
Right.
And that's where the dispute is. There's also a secondary dispute here, Akanksha, which has to do with Ukraine's own reforms, internal reforms. Remember, you don't just grant a country NATO membership and say overnight, abracadabra, you are a member of NATO. You have to earn it. There's reforms in the area, particularly in judiciary, and there are other allies that join the United States, and they want to make that clear that Ukraine would still have to qualify. So that's the background here. And the last point, quickly, I would add is that, yes, President Zelensky has been very critical in the run-up to this, of course, trying to do his best to press the alliance, including the U.S. But now that he's arrived in Vilnius, the latest report is that he has toned down that criticism, and the signal are that he will express his confidence, his faith in the NATO alliance and in the relationship that Ukraine has with NATO.
All right. Edward, with some partners like Germany, and as you rightly pointed out, the United States, they're still viewing the current scenario in a gray zone as far as Ukraine's membership is concerned. Taking that into consideration, what can the West offer Ukraine? Is that enormous amounts of security guarantees?
Yes, and they already have. And so this is quite significant. It should in no way be seen as, oh, this is some kind of a terrible blow or setback for Ukraine. No, they have created a very meaningful, very significant opportunity, symbolic and practical for Ukraine, called the Ukraine NATO Council. So Ukraine will have a privileged position to join, which no NATO member now can block, including Hungary, which is a pro-Russian member of NATO. So even Hungary cannot block this. Now this is established. Ukraine will have its own privileged position within NATO, in this Ukraine NATO Council. And guess what? Who had that privileged position before? It was Russia. And Russia was, after its back in 2014, when it seized Crimea, it was ejected from that. So now Ukraine replaces Russia with this privileged position. Otherwise, the relationship between NATO and the individual NATO states, including the United States, continues unabated. And we have to mention here that as well, that the success of this NATO summit, now that Turkey has relieved its objections and Sweden and will join Finland in joining NATO. So this is also a tremendous boost for Ukraine and a tremendous blow to the dictator in Russia, the weak and weakly judged leader, Vladimir Putin. Please.
All right. Edward, the Biden administration has reportedly told Congress it wants a security assistance model based on that which is the U.S. relationship with Israel. Can Ukraine do with an Israeli model?
Yes, it can. And this has been discussed and written about widely. And in fact, there are elements of the U.S.-Israel relationship that are entirely relevant to Ukraine. After all, Israel cannot join NATO either. It's not in Europe, so it cannot join NATO. It's not eligible in that sense. And yet there is this very strong military-to-military relationship between Israel and the United States, and that's entirely feasible between the U.S. and Ukraine, and that can grow formally, politically, between Washington and Kyiv. But that's not exactly the focus right now. The focus right now, the urgent focus, is on Ukraine's counteroffensive against the Russian forces that have brutally invaded, brutally occupied, that Russian forces that attack civilians without any regard to any law and wars or humanitarian law.
Absolutely,
and
Edward.
that is the focus right now, is to
I-
ensure that Ukraine has all the military support it needs. And the U.S. here has taken, again, the controversial step here of providing these cluster munitions for Ukraine to ensure that its battle now, this counteroffensive against Russia, can proceed and ultimately succeed.
That's exactly what I want to now ask you. How will the NATO summit help the Ukrainian counteroffensive? That too at a time when Russia itself is going through an internal power crisis. Will that also have a tangible impact on Putin?
Well, your question is excellent one, because you're exactly right, Akansha, that this comes at a time of internal turmoil for Vladimir Putin. And we can see this desperate move, these obvious moves of Vladimir Putin to try to present that he's a strong leader and that he's in charge after this embarrassing, humiliating military uprising by the Wagner Group, a group that he created and promoted for so long. And we know that this has damaged Vladimir Putin's standing at home. We know it's damaged his standing with his key partner and supporter, and that is China. And it's even damaged, we can be sure, Vladimir Putin's own confidence. So that's this NATO summit. And let's remember where it is taking place, Akansha. It's taking place not in Brussels, but right next door in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, a bordering state to Russia and a Baltic, a very important Baltic state with a connection to Ukraine and to Russia, right there. In fact, there's even a portion of Russian territory that is at the Baltic side of Lithuania. So this is a tremendous blow to Vladimir Putin. Again, I point out, you have President Erdogan of Turkey, also a very close figure for Vladimir Putin, someone who Vladimir Putin desperately needs, coming to this NATO summit and in this open symbolic gesture, joining hands in a three-part handshake with the Secretary General of NATO and the Prime Minister of Sweden, in this handshake of a symbol itself of Sweden coming in to the NATO alliance. This is a tremendous blow to Vladimir Putin, to his confidence, and to those of his supporters.
All right. I'm sure there will be a lot more coming in as the summit moves forward. Many thanks to you, Edward. It's been a pleasure to have you on my show, as is always.